She smiled at you this morning. She smiled at you yesterday. She smiled at you for 20 years straight, every single morning, through blizzards and hurricanes and wildfires and the worst storm seasons in recorded American history. And not once, not one single time, did she let you see what was actually happening inside her body. Not once did she let you see the infusion chair. Not once did she let you see the mornings when she woke up and ran a silent inventory before her feet even touched the floor. Can I feel my legs today? Is the fatigue the ordinary kind or the other kind? Is today a day I can function or a day that will cost me everything just to appear normal? You never saw any of that. What you saw was warmth. What you saw was competence. What you saw was a woman standing in front of a green screen telling you the truth about what was coming. And here is the thing that is going to absolutely destroy you when you hear it. Someone in that building looked at her, a woman freshly diagnosed with an incurable disease that was attacking her own nervous system, a woman who had just been told she might lose the ability to walk, and said to her face, "Stay quiet about this. No one wants to see a sick person on television." She was 35 years old. She was terrified, and she was told to smile and say nothing. She almost listened. Then came the nursing homes. Then came the funerals. Then came the cover-up. Then came the moment in February of 2026 when this woman, after 20 years of fighting a disease that has no cure while standing in front of millions of cameras, broke down and told the world the truth. It is getting harder every single day. What you are about to hear is not a weather story. It is a story about what happens when a woman refuses to disappear. Her name is Janice Dean. She was born in 1970 in Ottawa, Canada, a city of cold winters and quiet ambition, and the kind of upbringing that builds resilience without ever advertising it. From the time she was a small child, two things consumed her attention: the sky and the microphone. Weather fascinated her the way it fascinates everyone raised in climates where winter arrives without mercy and spring is something you have to earn. But it was her voice, warm and disarming and impossible to dismiss, that pointed her toward broadcasting. She did not inherit opportunity. She built it hour by hour across small radio stations and obscure television time slots and early morning shifts that most people would have quit after the first winter. She was carving out something real in the unglamorous way that real things get built. No shortcuts, no inheritance, just the slow, steady accumulation of skill. In 2004, Fox News offered her a position as a meteorologist. For a Canadian broadcaster who had worked her way up through the quiet corridors of regional radio and local television, this was not just a job offer. It was a transformation. She was stepping onto one of the most watched platforms in America, joining a morning show called Fox and Friends that reached millions of households before the country had finished its first cup of coffee. Her colleagues saw it immediately. Her viewers felt it within days. She was not performing care for the weather. She genuinely had it. She could take something as technical and potentially boring as atmospheric pressure systems and make you understand exactly why it mattered to your life. The combination of authority and approachability she carried was not manufactured. You cannot manufacture that. Fans gave her a nickname almost immediately: Janice Dean, the Weather Machine. Later, as her presence grew, that became Janice Dean, the Weather Queen. In 2007, she married Sean Newman, a New York City firefighter. They would have two sons named Matthew and Theodore. From the outside, by the late 2000s, everything looked complete. The career, the family, the recognition. But beneath that picture, quietly, without warning, the storm was already building. It was 2005. She had been at Fox News for less than 1 year, and her body sent a message she could not explain away. It started with things that were easy enough to rationalize: an overwhelming fatigue that no amount of sleep could fix, a strange numbness spreading through her thighs, a loss of sensation in the soles of her feet. She told herself it was the schedule. She told herself it was the pressure. She was covering one of the most catastrophic hurricane seasons in modern American history. Dennis, Emily, Katrina, Rita, Wilma, 5 major storms in a single year. The season ended. The storms passed. The satellite maps cleared. And the numbness did not go away. The neurologist ran the tests. The results came back. Multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is a chronic autoimmune disease in which the body turns against itself. The immune system attacks the protective myelin sheath surrounding the nerve cells, disrupting the signals the brain sends to the rest of the body. It is unpredictable in a way that defeats every instinct a meteorologist develops. There are no reliable models. There are no consistent patterns. There is no forecast that holds. The result can be fatigue, so heavy it feels physical, numbness, vision problems, loss of balance. In the worst moments, the complete inability to walk. Janice Dean had the relapsing remitting form. Periods of flare-ups followed by periods of remission, a disease that could be silent for months and then, without any warning at all, erupt. And then, on top of the diagnosis itself, came the instruction: stay quiet about it. Keep this private. No one wants to see a sick person on television. She was 35 years old. She was newly diagnosed. She was terrified. And she was told that her primary obligation in that moment was to protect the comfort of her audience. For a time, she complied. Not out of weakness. Out of the particular vulnerability of someone who is new to something and aware of how quickly opportunity can be withdrawn. She carried that diagnosis silently through broadcasts and live shots and hurricane coverage, absorbing a weight that millions of viewers never once suspected. But silence for Janice Dean was never going to be permanent. She eventually broke it. She went public. She became one of the most visible MS advocates in America. She told anyone who would listen exactly what the disease felt like from the inside. She described it as the invisible illness. You can have your hair done, your makeup on, look completely fine to the world, while your body is attacking your own central nervous system from the inside out. She raised awareness. She pushed for research funding. She stood at that green screen through flare-ups and remissions and infusion treatments and mornings when she did not know which version of her body was waiting for her, and she showed up anyway, every single morning. Then came the spring of 2020, and everything got worse in a way no forecast could have prepared her for. The coronavirus had arrived in New York with a ferocity that overwhelmed every institution it touched. Sean Newman's parents, Mickey and Dee Newman, were elderly and living in separate assisted living facilities in New York. Mickey had served in the United States Air Force. He had been a New York City firefighter, the same profession his son had carried forward. Dee had built her life alongside him across decades of marriage. They were not statistics. They were not data points on an epidemiological curve. They were real people. In late March of 2020, Mickey Newman died of COVID-19. 2 weeks later, Dee Newman was gone. They died alone. The pandemic had closed the doors of care facilities across the state. Families were not permitted inside. There were no final conversations in person, no hands held in the last hours, no ordinary human dignity of a proper goodbye. The grief was enormous. But for Janice Dean, grief was only the beginning. On March 25, 2020, the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, had signed an order requiring nursing homes to accept patients discharged from hospitals. Patients who were infected with the very virus that was killing the population those facilities were designed to protect. The order remained in effect for 46 days. During that window, thousands of COVID-positive patients were admitted into facilities housing the elderly and the medically fragile. The death toll that followed was staggering, and the true number was being hidden. Janice Dean was not a political commentator. She had always said the only red and blue she tracked were areas of high and low pressure on a weather map. But she began to speak. Not for any political party. Not for any ideology. As a daughter-in-law who had watched two people she loved die in circumstances she believed were entirely preventable. She described her father-in-law being transferred to what she believed was a floor housing COVID-positive patients in the days before he died. She described her mother-in-law contracting the virus, being rushed to a hospital, dying there, a death that would not even be counted in the state's official nursing home tally because she had technically died outside the facility. Janice Dean said it plainly. These are not numbers on a curve. These are people. The pushback was immediate and vicious. She was dismissed as just the weather girl. The phrase was deployed as a weapon, designed to reduce her, to make her grief seem illegitimate, to convince the public that a woman who forecast the weather had no standing to speak about public health policy. She filed the paperwork to testify before New York state lawmakers. She wrote the letters. She received confirmation that she would be permitted to speak. Then, days before the hearing, her name was removed from the list. She was told her presence made certain people uncomfortable. The woman who had once been told not to talk about her illness on television was now being told not to talk about her in-laws' deaths in front of legislators. She went on television instead. She pushed for investigations. She demanded real hearings with actual subpoena power. She called for a full public accounting of how many people had died and why the numbers were being deliberately suppressed. Andrew Cuomo, at that moment, in the spring and summer of 2020, was one of the most celebrated political figures in America. An Emmy Award was given. A book about leadership carried his name. The national media had their hero. Janice Dean watched all of it from the specific vantage point of someone who had just buried her husband's parents. In February 2021, a senior aide to Governor Cuomo confirmed on a recorded phone call that the administration had deliberately withheld data from federal investigators because they feared the real numbers would be used against them politically. The true death toll in New York nursing homes was eventually revised upward to more than 15,000 people, a figure that had been suppressed while Cuomo was accepting awards for pandemic leadership. Janice Dean had been saying this for nearly an entire year. The vindication was not satisfying. It never is when the price of being right is measured in the people you have lost. What she said instead was simple and honest. It was never about politics. It was always about the loss of life. By the summer of 2021, Andrew Cuomo's standing had collapsed. He resigned the governorship in August of that year. The man who had been handed an Emmy for crisis communication left office in disgrace. Through all of it, the advocacy, the grief, the public battles, her body was still keeping its own score. Multiple sclerosis does not pause for anything. It does not stand down because you are busy fighting battles on behalf of the dead. The disease she had been managing since 2005 with 4 infusion treatments every 6 months continued to press forward on its own timeline, completely indifferent to everything else happening in her life. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from overwork, but from vigilance. From waking up every morning and running a silent inventory before your feet touch the floor. Can I feel my legs today? Is the fatigue the ordinary kind or the other kind? Is today a good day, or the kind of day that will require everything I have just to appear normal? It is an exhaustion that never shows up on any broadcast. It lives in the private hours, in the spaces between appearances, in the gap between the woman the camera sees and the woman who drives home afterward. Janice Dean had been living inside that exhaustion for 2 full decades. And then came November 2025. She stepped away from Fox News. She told her followers directly and without drama that she was taking a break. She said she had been dealing with health issues that required rest and time to heal. She said her bosses had been kind and understanding. She said she would be back. Before the break began, she traveled to Rome with her husband Sean. The Catholic Church was observing its Jubilee year, an event that occurs once every 25 years and draws tens of millions of faithful to the city in search of renewal and grace. For Janice Dean, a woman of deep faith who had spent years carrying losses that defied easy consolation, the journey was completely intentional. She described it as a good place to begin healing spiritually. She came home. The healing, as it always is with multiple sclerosis, did not follow a straight line. In February 2026, she spoke again. In an emotional update that she shared publicly, she described the reality of her daily battle with a level of honesty that left no room for reassurance. She said it was getting harder every single day. She said she had accepted that the end of this particular chapter was near. These were not dramatic words from a woman who performs her suffering. They were simply true, and they landed differently than anything she had said before, because every person who had watched her stand at that green screen through hurricanes and political battles and personal devastations they never fully knew about understood, perhaps for the first time, exactly how much standing up had cost her. As of April 2026, Janice Dean confirmed she was mentally prepared for what lay ahead beyond Fox News. After more than 20 years with the network, she is facing whatever comes next with the same clarity and the same refusal to pretend that she has carried since 2005, when a doctor told her the verdict and someone in that building told her to keep it to herself. The MS community, the millions of Americans living with chronic illness, and the families who lost loved ones in nursing homes across New York in 2020 know her not because she was the best meteorologist on television, though by every account she genuinely is exceptional at what she does. They know her because she refused, at every single pressure point in her life, to be made smaller. She refused in 2005 when she was told to hide her diagnosis. She refused in 2020 when she was told her grief was not politically convenient. She refused in 2021 when the data finally proved what she had been saying all along. She refused in February 2026 when it would have been so much easier to say nothing. There is a version of Janice Dean's story that is easy to tell. The Canadian girl who earned her way onto American television. The meteorologist who became a household name. The woman who helped expose one of the worst public health cover-ups in modern American history. The advocate who spent 20 years making multiple sclerosis visible to millions who had never heard of it. That version is true. Every word of it is true. But it is not the whole story. And Janice Dean has spent her entire career insisting on the whole story. The whole story includes the infusion chair. It includes the mornings of silent inventory before her feet touch the floor. It includes 2 funerals in the spring of 2020 that her husband Sean should never have had to attend alone. It includes the state hearing she was barred from testifying at. It includes every dismissal dressed up as a question about her qualifications. It includes the moment in 2026 when she told the world it was getting harder and meant every word of it and said it anyway. What Janice Dean represents, to the millions living with chronic illness, to the families who lost loved ones in circumstances they were told not to question, to every woman who has been advised at some critical moment to make herself smaller and quieter for the comfort of others, is not triumph in the traditional sense. It is something more durable than triumph. It is the refusal to disappear. She has a husband who runs toward fires. 2 sons who are growing up watching their mother face things that would have silenced almost anyone, and choose again and again to speak. She has a faith that carried her to Rome in the hardest season of her recent life. She has a disease with no cure and a voice that has never once learned how to be quiet. Every morning that she woke up and moved through the day, whether that day ended at a green screen or in a hospital chair or somewhere in the quiet space between the two, she was making the same argument she has been making since 2005, when a doctor delivered a verdict and someone in a hallway told her to keep it to herself. The argument is this: I am here. This is real, and you are allowed to know about it. She did not become unforgettable because she was the best meteorologist on television. She became unforgettable because she understood, earlier and more deeply than almost anyone in that industry, that the most important forecasts are not about the weather. They are about what is coming, what it will cost, and whether the people in its path deserve to be warned. At 55, battered by loss and illness and battles most people never see, she is still standing. And for everyone who has ever been told that their storm was too inconvenient to mention, that is not a small thing. That is everything.